What makes elite players fall on draft day? In the 2022 NHL Draft, I had Lane Hutson ranked at number 11 and Frank Nazar at number 2, and both slipped significantly. And we'll break things down as well as some of my misses from that draft class on today's show.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USA Scout at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're going to look back to a draft class where I wasn't working with EP just yet. It was the draft where I just joined Dobber Prospects as their final rankings got released. And we'll be looking at 6 players from that class that were drafted relatively high. We're looking really within the first 2 rounds of that class and highlighting some players that I was able to hit on in my rankings that have just gone on to find significant success in the National Hockey League already. Players like Lane Hutson, the Montreal Canadiens, and Frank Nazar and Sam Rinzel of the Chicago Blackhawks. But we're also going to look at a few players that I overvalued and overhyped and what we can perhaps learn from those experiences, because in the end, scouting is a big learning experience. As you learn as much from your hits as you do from your mistakes, and if not more from those misfires. So we have a lot to talk about here on today's show, but before we jump into everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in the first segment, we're going to look at the big hitters. We're going to look at Frank Nazar, who I ranked at number 2 overall, as well as Lane Hutson, who I had ranked at number 11. Then the second segment, we'll move on and look at Sam Rinzel, so continuing the Chicago Blackhawks theme, as well as Seamus Casey, who has gotten off to a really nice start to his professional career in the New Jersey Devils organization. And finally, we'll wrap things up with 2 players I overvalued a tad, even if they're still valuable prospects in the league today and are really taking some nice strides in their development, and I still love watching them play. And that is Brad Lambert of the Winnipeg Jets and Noah Östlund of the Buffalo Sabres, both of whom I had comfortably within my top 10. So let's kick things off, because Frank Nazar has just gotten off to a flying start to his NHL career. He's been one of the most enjoyable players to watch for me over the past 4 years of doing this work. Players that have come to the draft class that I just fall in love with stylistically, because he brings so much speed, so much pace, so much intensity and middle drive, while also being so creative as a playmaker and a lethal goal scorer. And another guy who doesn't have the biggest frame at 5'10" and 190 pounds as a right shot center/right winger, but always been a player that I've really respected in his approach to the game. And so far this season, he's up to 4 goals and 9 points, playing big-time first-line minutes with the Blackhawks. He's played over 20 minutes a night in half the games he's played so far this season. So a player who's definitely earning the trust of the coaching staff, and it's so easy to see why. There's so many subtle details that Frank Nazar executes at a really high-end level. He's a player that I really respect in being able to so doggedly attack the middle of the ice while being undersized, and also as a player that was able to bounce back from a massive injury. Like, just to roll back the clock a little bit, in his D+1 season, his first year jumping to college hockey, right after hearing his name called at 13th overall on draft day by the Chicago Blackhawks, he only got into 13 games with the University of Michigan, putting up 7 points in that run. And you had a lot of people questioning, is this injury going to really offset the quality that he brings to the ice in terms of pure speed? And is he going to be able to make up ground from players that got a leg up on him with that extra year of development? But since then, it has been nothing but catching up to the mean and surpassing players that were selected ahead of him, and really showing why this is a player that I had ranked at number 2 overall. And he was in a tier of his own for me at number 2. The only player I had ranked higher was Shane Wright. I was a bit too low on Logan Cooley in this draft class, having him ranked at 4th overall. But in the tier of his own, in my rankings, I called that tier the tank tier, because Frank Nazar is an absolute tank. And just to read you what I wrote on Nazar in my draft analysis, Frank Nazar was my favorite player to watch this season. His constant driving up the middle lane and refined inside game set him apart from the other high-speed, high-skill guys inside my top 10. He plays at a breakneck pace and speed and is equally a natural goal scorer as he is a refined playmaker. His ceiling may be the very highest in the entire draft class, in my view. When he's not driving up the slot or passing into it, Nazar looks to drift into it when he has a chance to get open as a passing option in the slot. And when he gets the puck in high danger areas, he's an excellent finisher. But what makes Nazar such a special offensive piece is his versatility and adaptability. He can score off the rush. He can create with his passing off the rush. He can score during sustained offensive presences, and he's able to take on the role of a playmaker both at even strength and on the man advantage. He plays with an intensity that none of my other top-ranked forwards can match, and this translates as well to his defensive game, where he pressures the carrier consistently. His entire game projects extremely well to the National Hockey League, and that makes it all the more astounding and confusing to me that he's ranked number 15 on Bob McKenzie's board. Whoever snaps him up in the teens or even later will make out like bandits real quick. And the Chicago Blackhawks are certainly making out like bandits at this point. This is clearly a top-line forward in the making if he isn't already at that level, which I think there's certainly an argument that he is. And I think Blackhawks fans have a truly special player here, as Frank Nazar probably shouldn't have been available that late in the draft. And to get that asset through the trade of Kirby Dach, I think, was just fantastic business from Kyle Davidson and co. But moving on, we're going to talk about the team that gave up that draft selection in the Kirby Dach trade, and that's the Montreal Canadiens, who probably won't be too upset with how their 2022 draft ended up going, getting Juraj Slafkovsky at number 1, and more importantly, Lane Hutson at 62nd overall. A player that I had ranked at number 11 and spent the entire draft class ruminating on my decision of my stance of seeing this player as a true difference-making caliber prospect in the National Hockey League, because the discourse was all about his size and he's going to stagnate when he hits college hockey. And I was still very new to doing scouting, and I had a lot of doubt that my viewpoint was going to end up being accurate down the stretch. But the more I watched, the more certain I became that I saw what I was seeing. And Lane Hutson was such a special player. And to read the excerpt that I had written about him, I don't think you understand just how close to ranking Hutson in my top 10 I truly was. He held on to the number 9 spot for over a month in May and June. But in the end, I had to acknowledge the extra risk that comes with selecting Hutson, and I couldn't justify placing 2 other high upside defensemen with significantly higher floors behind him, as I've fallen so in love with Hutson's play this year. There may be no defender available in the 2022 draft class who has more dynamic skill than Lane Hutson. The undersized defenseman plays with high-end deception, skill, and planning. He reads the ice offensively extremely well, processes those reads quickly, and executes upon them with smooth hands and crisp passes. His shot is a real tool as well, despite his stature. Hutson activates in the offensive zone more than any defender in the draft class not named Denton Mateychuk, and he has the patience and vision to create dangerous scoring chances from these plays. He's also an invaluable player in offensive transition. He manages the puck well and creates zone X's and entries both by passing and carrying the puck with real confidence, though he can try to do a little bit too much at times. His defensive game isn't poor, as his positioning is sound, gap is tight, and his active stick blocks passing lanes. However, his entire projectability rests on his ability to play under physical pressure. Undersized defensemen need to be able to retain the effectiveness of their games under increased pressure and physicality at the professional level. Lane Hutson is as slight a player as you'll find in the NHL draft class, and this obstacle is a large one, but if he can surmount it and keep improving the things that already make him one of the most entertaining and special players available, he could turn into a real draft day steal. He is the definition of a boomer bust prospect. If he cracks an NHL top 4, I believe he will nail down a top pairing role. But if he doesn't, he likely won't be an NHLer at all. The risk will put off a lot of teams, but he could be the highest value selection on day 2 of the draft. And I think Habs fans can certainly agree with a lot of the sentiments there with Lane Hutson, the special aspects that he has on puck with the creativity and the overall intelligence he brings on both sides of the puck. And I think it's so interesting to kind of look back at these two players that were playing with the NTDP. And I watched a lot of the program in that draft class. There was so much talent on that roster. And these are the two players that I enjoyed watching the most from that lineup. And that both of them have now hit the NHL and hit the ground running. I mean, do I even have to go down the list of Lane Hutson's NHL achievements so far? Of course, he's got the Calder Trophy so far this season. He is really starting hot after signing that 8-year extension at $8.85 million a year. He has 9 points in 10 games, has the joint lead, or he has the only lead for assists in the entire NHL among defensemen, and that is building off of his 66-point campaign last season. So the sky's the limit with this kid, and he certainly has a whole lot of runway as well to keep refining his game in the coming seasons. But in the next segment, we're going to talk about two players that haven't quite reached that like superstar upside just yet, and Sam Rinzel and Seamus Casey, but are both players that I think bring so much offensive skill from right shot defense, and are both guys I could have probably ranked a little bit higher, especially in Sam Rinzel's case. But before we jump into them, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have a full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on either your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is made for you, as it does all of the heavy lifting on your behalf. You can link all of your accounts in just minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel like you are in control of your money without ever needing to touch a single spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here. And we're going to kick things off with a player that I had ranked too low on draft day and who's just made a fantastic debut in the National Hockey League. And that is, of course, Sam Rinzel of the Chicago Blackhawks, a player that was about as raw of a prospect as you're going to find in the NHL draft class when he was a first-time eligible. He only played a couple games in the USHL, was mostly a Minnesota high school player in that season, playing with Chaska High. He did get into 21 games with Waterloo that season, but overall was chaotic in every viewing I logged that year. But since then, every single season, this player has just added more and more strength to his toolkit. In his time in college with the University of Minnesota, he only spent 2 years there, and every single season saw a massive leap in defensive intelligence, defensive effectiveness, and overall trustability from his coaches, while just doing all the small details well on the ice, the stick placement, the gap control off the rush. All these things just took massive leaps as he was playing in college, and as soon as he's made the jump to the National Hockey League, he's been an incredibly important piece for the Chicago Blackhawks. He has 3 points so far this season in 9 games played. Last season, he logged 5 assists in 9 games as well. So he's all the way up at 8 points in 18 games, which is certainly impressive for a rookie defenseman. And he brings that 6'4", 190-pound frame as a right shot that is just so valuable. And why was I too low on Sam Rinzel? Well, a lot of it has to do with that risk. And what I wrote in my report was that he is nowhere near the 46th best draft eligible player right now. And I had him ranked at 46th overall. He ended up going to Chicago at 25 inside the first round. However, his potential really is quite high. He just needs a ton of development to get there. He's a player you only pick if you trust your development team. He needs a bunch of refinement and likely will not touch the NHL for 4 or 5 seasons, which I was wrong about. I was very wrong about. He dominated the Minnesota high school circuit this season, and his 27 USHL games demonstrate that he has tremendous tools and really impressive upside, but also continuously tried and failed to do the things that he got away with against weaker competition that he was used to. He's a really big offensive defenseman, and he knows how to use his physicality. He's able to clear the net front effectively. And on puck, it's where he really shines brightest with his deceptive skill, especially while carrying the puck up the ice. His mobility in all 4 directions is one of the best in this draft class, but his gap control is really inconsistent, and he has a tendency to get burned by the USHL's more skilled players in transition by biting on their moves and giving up the inside lane. In his own zone, his scatting habits also need a bunch of work. And these are all the things that every single time I went back to watch him in college, I was so surprised by, because every single viewing, every one of these aspects that I had doubts about gotten better and better and better. The development that Sam Rinzel underwent in the 3 years between being drafted and hitting the National Hockey League were just so impressive, in my opinion. And I think that the Blackhawks have a real gem on their hands. This is a player with number 2 defenseman upside, in my opinion. I think he's got that top pairing skill in his locker, and I think that you could certainly make an argument between him and Artem Levshunov who the higher value defensive prospect is at this point in time. And as a reminder, Levshunov was a 2nd overall draft pick. So for that to be the case, I think is really, really indicative of the steps that Rinzel has taken since being drafted. But let's move on to a guy that I had a lot higher on draft day, I believe at 16th overall on my board, and that's Seamus Casey, the offensive defenseman that was drafted by the New Jersey Devils at 46th overall in 2022. And he has just been playing really sound hockey since making the jump to the professional ranks. The bigger issue has just been staying healthy since making the leap to the pro level. Last season, he got into 14 games with the Devils, and he got 8 points in that stretch, including 4 goals. But the defensive side of the game definitely needed some ironing out. So got sent down to Utica, played 30 games, got 18 points, and so far this season has 1 assist in 1 game played against the Laval Rocket. So he's just come back to action just yesterday as of the time of recording here. So very glad to see him back in uniform, back on the ice. And he's a guy that the intelligence, the mobility have always just been such massive strengths and really compensated for his small frame on the ice. And it was a really big swing on upside for me to have him ranked as high as 16th overall. But it's his talent as a playmaker and activating low to the offensive zone. His playmaking from the goal line is one of his bigger strengths, in my opinion. When he activates, he really is at his best, as well as when he keeps his feet moving. But again, the defensive side of the game, it is built on clever stick work, angling players towards the boards rather than imposing himself physically. So that physical side of the game is certainly still going to be a challenge as he gets adapted to the National Hockey League in time at 5'10", 181 pounds. But he's got the mobility and the IQ to compensate. So I really do view Seamus Casey as a really exciting player and a guy that, with the level of puck skills that he has, could certainly push all the way up to a second pairing role with the New Jersey Devils in the future, and a player that, honestly, with hindsight, maybe I had ranked a little bit too high, but overall, I'm glad that I was bullish on this style of player, because if I had him ranked way lower, like a lot of other people did, guy like Lane Hutson would have also ended up lower on my board as a result, because I saw those two as relatively close in terms of their offensive impact in their draft eligible seasons. I just saw Hutson as being the more special one between the two. But that wraps up the second segment here for us. In the final one, we'll talk about two other misses that I had inside my top 10 where I was just a bit too bullish and doubled down on certain tools rather than others and had the blinders on a little bit. But we'll break those down in the next segment. First, we got a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the entire app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many different ways to play. I've built parlays, done player props, and even gotten in on the action live as it's unfolding right in front of me. My favorite of the bunch are certainly the same game parlays, though, as they allow me to combine predictions from different games in order to maximize my potential returns on a single swing. So, what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment as we're talking about Brad Lambert and Noah Östlund, two players I was extremely bullish on in that 2022 draft class. Östlund, I had ranked at number 7. Lambert, I had ranked at number 3. So very, very high on these players, was really, really banking on tools in terms of handling and skating combination and also offensive creativity and IQ, especially in Noah Östlund's case. And I think I really overshot a little bit in those rankings and have been able to learn from that with hindsight, because that's what the draft is. It is all a learning process. And when you swing too hard on just tools without the overall toolkit to support not just translating to the National Hockey League, but elevating one's game when they get there is just such an important part of this process. And Brad Lambert's a guy that's kind of been on the fringes of cracking the NHL lineup with the Winnipeg Jets. He's gotten into 2 games this season, in both with the Winnipeg Jets and the Manitoba Moose. And last season, he had 7 goals and 35 points in the AHL. The year prior was a stronger campaign with 21 goals and 55 points in 64 games in Manitoba. But yeah, that year-to-year kind of regression at the pro level is a bit concerning at this stage. And what he's been showing me recently in my viewings has largely been a focus on checking. And I haven't seen really big steps in terms of his dynamic offensive threat and his ability to use his feet to create offense consistently. And the feet, I mean, he was, in my opinion, the best skater in terms of just mechanics and fluidity in the entire draft class that year. And everything just flowed through it. I mean, his frame is an average one at 6 feet tall, 183 pounds. And he was just a player I was so excited about. Just to read you a little snippet about what I wrote. His combination of stick handling and speed is unmatched in this draft class. He plays at a high pace, has a ton of dynamic ability, and is elite in transition, especially as a puck carrier. I realized that his production was really bad in Liga, but he was surrounded by line mates that just couldn't keep up with his pace, skill, or thought processes, and Lambert needs line mates that are on his wavelength. His playmaking ability is a standout skill as well. He's able to execute on just about every pass he sees, and when he keeps his head up and continuously scans for options, which is albeit inconsistent, he's able to make the really high-end play. He's a better playmaker than he is a goal scorer, but he still is quite efficient in his goals, in his shooting ability. I see 1C upside with Brad Lambert, but there's a wider range of possible outcomes with him than Logan Cooley or the other players inside my top 5. And that wide range of possible outcomes is certainly what we're seeing here so far in his development. That extra step to really be a game breaker, both consistently in the AHL as well in the National Hockey League, just hasn't quite been there just yet. And I still think that the tools are fantastic. I still see middle 6 upside for this player if he's able to kind of find a niche as a high motor playmaking guy that's able to chip in both on the PK with his speed and his stick work, as well in the power play with that playmaking ability. But I just haven't seen that playmaking improve year to year to year, which I needed to. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well with prospects in terms of the development that they see throughout their draft years. And Lambert's a guy that I thought didn't take the biggest steps throughout his draft year, and I just didn't value that enough. And that's a learning experience for me, as well as almost exclusively just swinging on his tools rather than the habits that we were seeing on the ice. So definitely a player I was a little bit too high on, and maybe a lot too high on, actually. But last but not least here for today's show, we're going to head to the Buffalo Sabres with a player that I'm not low on. I don't want Sabres fans to get mad at me here for harping on Noah Östlund. He's still a player I love a bunch, but I had him ranked at number 7 overall, and I don't think that there's many arguments right now, at least, that he is at that like top 10 caliber in a redraft at this stage, but still a player that has really taken strides year to year, unlike Brad Lambert, and is definitely a guy I would select higher in a re-ranking. But he's a guy that last season with the Rochester Americans put up 19 goals and 36 points in 45 games, and this year's already up to 5 points in 4 games in the AHL, and also has 3 NHL games to boot here so far this season, having been called up just this past week. And he's a guy that I really think will be able to find himself a niche in Buffalo inside the top 9 in the relatively near future. One of my colleagues at Elite Prospects, Austin Broad, wrote a scouting report on his game against the Toronto Marlies when he was still playing in the AHL. This is from October 10th. Östlund was one of Rochester's most engaged forwards in this game. He was active in all 3 zones and relied on to help drive their offensive play. Using his playmaking ability and offensive awareness, he was the primary puck handler on the top power play unit and played his role exceptionally. His assists both came on the man advantage, delivering clean, accurate passes onto his teammate's stick. His second assist was a great seam pass across the ice into Isak Rasin's wheelhouse for a one-time goal. While the offensive game will garner the attention, it's his 200-foot effort that really should be highlighted. He was active on the back check and was able to effectively suppress his assignment's scoring chances at 5-on-5, and he has the upside of a skilled top 6 forward. But with that high motor and defensive responsibility, Östlund is showing the versatility to play anywhere in the lineup at the NHL level. This will help his path to the National Hockey League, as he's proving to be reliable in whatever role he's asked to play. And this is basically exactly what I saw in his draft year as well. It's always been his combination of dynamism, skill, intelligence, and motor and defensive IQ. Like, these things have always just been so high end that despite entering his draft year campaign as a 163-pound player, was just so projectable in my eyes. And while he certainly is taking some really big strides here, I do think that slower development path because of that frame is something that has maybe allowed other players to leapfrog him, at least here in the early results of the 2022 draft class. But I want to pass the question on to you. Of the players I talked about here today, where did you have them ranked in terms of like the teams that you cheer for? Were you hoping that your team would land any of these talents on draft day? And what are your reactions to how they've begun their professional careers in North America in the years since? And I'd also love to hear your impressions of kind of this format for an episode of looking back at my own draft rankings and contextualizing the stars of the NHL today with my early impressions of them as draft eligible. So I'd love to hear some feedback if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always greatly appreciated. And for your second listen, you're going to head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know right now to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. That is it. That is all. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I'll catch you listening again very, very soon.